Ho ho. All right. Just had to turn it incredibly down low. Okay, I think that's going to be the kicker. We're not going to be the best quality, but it's going to be it's like those things like when you shoot 4K on your iPhone and you're like, "Oh yeah, it's 4K," but then you actually import the footage and it doesn't actually look that good. It's going to be this. It's going to look like it comes from a nice camera, but the resolution's not actually going to be all that good, which is totally fine because we're going to get into this live stream and it's going to be great. What is up, folks? Thank you for joining. I'm sorry that first stream didn't go all that well, but we are back on. I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction to what I want to talk about today, what you can expect from these live streams as kind of something to allow a few people to jump on, because I'm starting this 20 minutes early in hopes I can finish just a little bit early, because after I turn the camera off, after I close the laptop, I'm directly going to be going to the airport because we are going to Minneapolis. So that's currently the plan. But what I want to talk about today and what I want to cover as part of this is a project that I had in my mind as I was working at the restaurant Lysverket in Norway. That is the restaurant that I used to be a sous chef at. And I went back because I needed to get the suit for my wedding maid, but also my old chef, Chris, was opening his third restaurant. Spoiler alert, the restaurant didn't open until after I was there. For everyone that's been part of an opening restaurant, you know kind of what that life is like. There's delays all the time. And so what I gave myself the project of while I was there, instead of like coming up with new dishes or like trying to think of something else creative to do with the team there, is that I immediately noticed as I started working on, I think it was the first or second day, the chef on the meat station was struggling a little bit. And so I was like, what if I take it on as my project to help this guy hopefully feel a little bit better than where he started? And so I took it upon myself to hopefully spend some time with him and take a look at some of his processes, if he had any bad habits or if he just hadn't gotten some like the adequate training to really crush it on a station that is truly, truly very, very difficult. It is one of the more difficult stations that I've personally worked on. So the first piece, so talking about these live streams in general, I'm hoping to kind of keep them around 30 minutes, and that is very centered on a specific topic. So obviously this one is all about kind of the tactics and tips that I gave Carlos during the live stream, during the time that I spent with him on the station. And then I would kind of like to lead until maybe like 15 minutes of Q&A. So overall, you can look forward to like 45-minute long live streams, and I hope that that kind of satisfies everyone's kind of desires of what I can spend some one-on-one time with the Patreon folks. So I had a conversation with my friend Patrick, who is aka Dawsfee, a while ago, where I told him that I would be really interested in pursuing some sort of model of what would be like in-person coaching or training for line cooks or sous chefs at restaurants. Basically like giving very contextual advice, because with videos it's hard because they're going out to thousands of people, right? And I know from my experience that every single restaurant is different. So the advice that you would have given me for Grace is different than what would have worked for me at Lysverket, right? And contrast that with any other project, right? Doing the work I'm doing now, the advice that I need now is different than the advice that I needed when I was just starting and I didn't have any cooking skills. So I'm always kind of cognizant of that. And I like to keep the advice very contextual. And so this was a great case study for me to kind of put that in place of like, I go into a restaurant, I'm not working there, so I don't have the same obligations and responsibilities that a manager has, but I'm available to kind of help the staff grow and execute at a more effective level, which was really, really satisfying to actually see deployed. And I don't think that could have happened at any other restaurant. So that was great. The meat station at Lysverket is a tricky one. So you're basically set up with a 4-burner induction stove. So you're staring at this 4-burner induction stove. To your right is a combi oven. It's like a half combi oven, not the one that's the size where you could fit a physical human inside. It's like the half size ones. And then to your left is a small charcoal oven and grill. So you will partner with that with your station partner, and that will more or less be kind of like the ways that you execute things on your station is you have this combi oven that you can set to different temperatures and different steam levels. And then you also have your 4-burner induction stove. You have your grill station set up next to that. And then behind you, which is where the pass is, you also have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8 ninth pan rail, so you can keep cold mise en place up there if you want. Keep your cutting board right in front of that, and then to the side of you is kind of where all the food gets plated up, and then you also have a sink to the side of you. And the funniest thing about that station is you actually wash all of your own dishes, which I think is a little bit insane. And I know exactly how that feels to be on that station. I'm just going to check here how if there's any comments about the stream not working for people on Patreon, because I'm not really seeing all that many people in the lobby here. All good. We're going to carry on. So I hope that gives you a little bit of a visual layout. It's not the biggest station, but at any point in time, you have between like 4 to 6 dishes coming off of your station. And the busiest nights at Lysverket now will get to be about around the 100 people mark. If you're in triple digits at Lysverket, you're really busy, and that'll max out at like 120. I've never done more than 120 or 130 at that restaurant. So just to kind of give you some context, and you can like maybe relate that to your restaurant, and you say, well, that's way busier than my restaurant, or you say, well, that's kind of peanuts compared to my restaurant, but maybe there's some details in here that you can extract and use for your own organization. So the way I want to structure this one specifically is not to kind of bounce around too much. I want to present a problem, something that I saw causing issues, and then kind of give some examples of solutions that I was able to either provide or ones that Carlos was able to implement and actually find to be pretty effective with his work. So starting off, I asked to see his prep list, and most of you have seen the prep list video. You know exactly what I think about prep lists and how how my prep list looks very different from how most people probably write them, and that's intentional. It's because I like to use my prep list as a 30,000-foot view of what I'm working on, as well as a prioritizer. I don't like to have them just for the sake of having them. I don't like to keep things in my head. I think that's a bad place for ideas to live. I think that's better if you are able to translate that to a paper list. The first problem that I noticed was that he had a list that was too broad, right? And I talk about this in my prep list video, where if you have to dice veal for tartare, you don't put veal tartare on the prep list, right? And the first thing that I noticed with that specific project on his prep list was that it was a project where he had to take a piece of the leg of the veal. He had to clean the kind of like aged, dried skin off of the veal, take the nice meat off of the bone, do something with the bones, whether it was make stock or roast them or whatever. He had to dice the meat, and then he also had to dice lardo, which was coming from, I think one of the front of house managers brought lardo from Italy, and that went into the tartare mix. And so when you hear that, I literally just listed 4 or 5 projects that go along with something that you just have one item on your prep list for. And so when you see, oh, I only have 12 things to do today, if you expand that and multiply each of those by 5, you actually have 60 things to do today. And so it's no wonder you feel a little bit of a sense of overwhelm when you're going into this and you're kind of frustrated by how you feel going into your day, right? So the first thing that I suggested for him was to kind of like really expand your prep list a little bit. Notion, which is this project that I use, has these things that are toggles, right? So when you're making lists, you can collapse them into things. So I don't have an issue with you having veal tartare as like a header for your prep list, but then expand it underneath and make sure that you're writing out all those little projects that go with it, whether it's oh man, I really have to clean up the slicer after this project. That's a project. People know that cleaning an appliance takes time, right? So put clean slicer as part of your prep list, right? Because that does take time out of your day. That would be the first kind of tip that I gave him, and hopefully it helped. The next point on the prep list side of things was not being prioritized. And so the biggest thing that stuck out for me with Carlos was that he was prioritizing his list for himself, but then he would get very overwhelmed when either a stagiaire or an apprentice would come and ask him, hey, what can I help you with? Or when a sous chef would come up to him and say, what are your big projects? What's left? Why do you feel so overwhelmed right now? And the biggest thing that I found that helps with the 1, 2s, and 3s when you're prioritizing your prep list is that those 3s on the prep list, for those that haven't seen, the 1s are the projects that you want to do like first, like right away, immediately. The 3s are the ones that are like pick herbs or like roll wipey towels or slice slice whatever. Slice something that is like an a la minute project. Those are the 3s. And so when you're thinking about kind of how you structure your day and how you prioritize things, you want to be able to get to a point where it's closer to the end of the day, people are starting to have some free time, and then you can start to give them those 3s projects. Because if you give them something like a veal tartare project, we've already discussed that comes with a million questions. And so being able to have the wherewithal to be organized enough to say, I know what I'm working on, but secretly I would love if someone were to come to help me to take some of these things off of my plate. And I think that was a really big unlock for Carlos when he was able to see, like, that's what people mean when they say, how am I doing? You know what I mean? Not because what he would do when he was asked, how's everything going? What do you need help with? He would basically tell people what he's working on. And that's a poor way to kind of communicate, because the correct answer and the way that I would push you to hopefully answer these questions if you're presented with this kind of interaction at work is, I'm working on the meat sauce. I'm dicing the beets right now. I'm then going to go into making watercress puree. What I could really use a hand with is if you were to slice these onions for me. Right? Now that's productive, because then they know you're not trying to get me to take your whole entire list off you. You have some stuff in motion, but you're a little bit behind, and you could use a little bit of a hand. Because then if you make that available to people as knowledge, then they can take that and do things what they will, right? So if you tell that to a sous chef and they know that they have an apprentice cleaning the walk-in downstairs because they think that that person has nothing better to do, they can say, oh, go grab that person. They need to help you out with this project, right? So, and the other piece of information that I had down in my notes here was to do what scares you first. And I think that that's kind of more or less a no-brainer. I think more people than not know exactly to do that, and then that's kind of the kicker with prep lists and organizing yourself in general. I think that's with like most people. It's easy to put off the thing that scares you because you don't immediately want to do that. Like it's a lizard brain that turns on there, right? I'm going to start recording here too. Maybe that's a good idea. So the other issue that I saw with his prep list in general was that he was working off of a printed prep list. So one that you make on the computer, and then you print out 5 of them for your 5-day work week. And each day, based on the menu that shouldn't hopefully change, you can kind of you don't have to write the same things out every day. You notice that there's a bit of a template to your week, right? But the issue that I had with that system that he had was that he wasn't changing it as the dishes changed. So for anyone that's worked in a place where the seasonal product kind of dictates the menu, as the beets go out of service, something else has to take its place. And when you have a templated prep list, it's easy for things to get kind of dusty on the shelf, if that makes sense, because you're not actively changing this prep list every day. And so you ultimately have things that are from days old that are still on your prep list that are that's clogging up space in your visual memory as you're looking at this snapshot of your day. And because you think it's templated and it's ready to go, things don't carry over from the day before, if that makes sense. And so what I was always a big fan of is that at the end of my shift, I would take a look at my kind of like puree splattered, grease tainted, crumpled up, kind of ripped prep list, and then I would set that next to a fresh sheet of paper. And I would be like, okay, what happened today? What's happening tomorrow? What did we talk about changing from today? What really fucked me up today that I can hopefully change tomorrow? And all of that kind of gets translated from one list to the next. It's not as easy as just kind of clicking print and printing out a new one. That's a poor reference to a day that wasn't all that successful. You know what I mean? Because then what ultimately ends up happening is you go through the motions again, and that's the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. So that was something that I really pushed him. I was like, okay, this needs to be either something that you start off your day where you go through your list and you cross things off that either don't apply anymore, they're from different menus, or, I mean, he would have things on there that was like, he would prep once a week or once every 2 weeks, you know what I mean, like staples on his station. And to me, that doesn't need to be clogging up your headspace. You need to know, like, yep, I have that, it's on the station, it's ready to go, it's still fresh, I can use it, as opposed to thinking that, like, oh, well, I need to have roasted garlic puree on my prep list. Does that make sense? The other thing that I saw an issue with was because it was printed in a way that was so compacted, there wasn't ample space or reference points to take notes as the sous chef comes up to you and gives you changes. And for anybody that works at a tasting menu place, you know this. Things change in the moment. So the chef will have just seen something on Instagram and he says, hey, I want to take the celery dish tonight and I want to plate it like this. And he shows you a photo from his phone, right? Or I want to do this with the tomatoes today because I don't think they're as sweet as the ones we were getting last week. And then you need to be able to take that information and not just say, yes, chef. You need to be able to translate that into how am I going to act on this to make it so the first pickup is exactly what the chef has expected. Because when that information gets conveyed to you from management to employee, the management has checked that box in their brain, right? In their mind, it's in motion, it's going to happen, there wasn't any questions that were asked. So then it's weird when all of a sudden something happens where that doesn't necessarily become the case in a, like when the dish gets passed up, if it's not like what we talked about, that's an issue. And because the prep list was so cramped and there wasn't enough room, like you were drawing arrows to things, you know what I mean? So like give your prep list some space to breathe, you know, so you double space things if you have to. So when you have the bell pepper project, if they say that you're going to season it with a little bit of smoked paprika instead of cumin today, you need to give yourself space so that you don't just write it in the bottom corner of your prep list, because that's not going to click anything in your brain. That's the same as kind of writing it on a Post-it note and slapping it and sticking it in your pocket, you know? Like, yes, you wrote it down, but are you going to see it when it matters? That's, I think, what I would urge you to think about and kind of the advice that I gave during this process. So if there are any questions on the prep list, I would love to hear it. Otherwise, we will move on to the next piece that I wanted to discuss about organization. So I made the reference when I walked back onto that station for the first time in 3 years of like, how did I set up my station and how is Carlos setting up his station and what differs? And I started to look at it and I had this thing click in my brain. I was like, oh, he's organizing it because of how someone else told him how to organize it. He doesn't actually have any ownership of